What's up, everybody, and welcome to Comp Check episode number 4. Thank you for watching or listening. And before we get into the VCT analysis this week, I just wanted to ask for a little bit of feedback and see sort of what aspects of the podcast you guys are finding the most interesting. Do you want me to go a little bit deeper onto stats or individual matches? I've kind of just been trying to cover like as broad a spectrum as possible, getting all of the matches done, making sure that we cover China, making sure that we cover every single region. But I'm kind of curious, like, what I can do to make the podcast more interesting or enjoyable for you guys, the listeners. So feel free to leave those comments down below. And with that being said, let's get right into the action. We're going to go in reverse order this week. We're going to cover Americas first. And it was a pretty interesting week of Americas overall. There was definitely some upsets and some interesting things that happened as far as what teams were doing. Let's start with Leviathan and Envy. This was always going to be an interesting matchup for me just because Lev has been sort of a team on the rise, and Envy obviously has a very interesting roster that has shown some high highs, but also some pretty low lows. So coming into this week, I was definitely favoring Lev. I'm pretty sure that I picked him to win this, but I was a little bit worried that maybe if they got a little bit too brawly against a team like Envy, with a ton of shooters on it, that we might have a fairly close game and potentially Envy could even steal a map or even maybe the series. But what ended up happening was just a complete flattening. Lev looked insane. They look like they are in a really good spot in terms of their read on the meta, how they want to play the game, and their roles look incredibly comfortable as well, which is a very interesting and good thing to see out of this team. Meanwhile, Envy looked like they had completely forgotten everything that they did well in the previous week, and it looked horrendously bad. Now, it's always kind of interesting because when a team looks really good and another team looks really bad, how much of that do you put on the team looking good and sort of just completely countering what the other team is doing, and how much of that is a team misplaying and making the game easy for the other team? And so because of that, I don't want to overreact too much to Lev, but what I am seeing out of them makes me think that they are probably one of the best teams in the region. And Envy is just a team that, depending on the day, will either show up or not. And in this particular match, it was a not. So as we can see on Bind, it was just pistol, the anti-eco, and then just an absolute brutalization from Lev. It really felt like Envy had zero answer to Lev in terms of how they were taking space. But I also feel like Envy didn't even really make an attempt to slow Lev down. One of the biggest things that I will always talk about when you are playing against a team that is either a very aggressive team or playing a very aggressive comp like Double Duelist is that you must tax them before they get to the site hit. You have to slow them down before they gain momentum and gain space early. And what that means is like you need to sort of put up barriers or sort of checkpoints, as it were, that they have to cross using utility or spending lives or damage to get through. And so on a map like Bind, for example, you really want to stop them scaling up into B long, or you want to stop them scaling into showers, you want to stop them scaling into short. And that means you have to kind of like push up where you are contesting them and stop them in the earlier parts of the choke points on the map and not let them get close to the site. Because once they get to the like actual site choke point, it's really hard to stop an aggressive team. And especially if it's a team that is sort of like rolling forward and maybe you only have like one person peeking early. So what Envy was doing a lot is they even had people like sitting in spawn ready to rotate quickly, but that's not the answer. I could like see the game plan of, hey, let's try and make ourselves really fast to rotate and flood, but if you're just trying to flood and get to the site in time, it's usually too late. And what you actually need to do against these aggressive teams is you have to stop their momentum, because otherwise they're just going to get into sight and then you're going to be retaking all the time, which is always a bad prospect for winning rounds. So like Demon One or Kezan or somebody would solo swing showers, and maybe they would get instantly picked off or they would get pushed off the line immediately, and then Lev would just take all of that space, and then they'd pick up the orb, and then they would just hit the site. Um, or they would freeze, and then Envy would have no information because they got pushed off the line too early, and then Lev would just roll forward. So in the current meta, that's something to really keep an eye on, is if a team is unable to stop the aggressive team taking early space, there's almost no chance for them to win the map. You like have to contest them early. So anyway, there isn't too much to say about this. This was really just like an absolute destruction by Lev. I'm really liking what I'm seeing out of Neon, just playing like Sentinel, playing Smokes, playing whatever the team needs. He always looks good. And then I think the rest of the team just looks super comfortable in the roles that they're playing. For Envy, I mean, they tried out the veto on Fracture, and it was pretty bad. I made a video actually breaking this down on my other channel, which you can check out, just sort of explaining like why Demon One should not be playing veto, and how you can play veto better. But anyway, not too much to talk about with regards to this map. Lev plays MIBR next, which will be a really interesting game based off of other results that happened this week. And at the same time, Envy plays G2. So I believe Envy is out at this point. No, actually, they're not out yet. So this next match is really important. And you would assume that G2 should win this, but you never really know with a team like Envy. Like, there's always a chance that they just kind of say, screw it, and everybody just kind of like plays mad. But I probably would lean G2 in that matchup. Okay, moving on to the next one. We had Loud against G2, speaking of. And this was another kind of interesting game. It wasn't really that good. And it's kind of hard to tell like why. I think that we continue to see like pretty good performances from Baby Bay and Valen, and it looks like Leaf is maybe a little bit more comfortable than he has been. They have him on the Phoenix here. I don't know. There's something weird about G2 right now where they don't look like they are totally fluid in how they're playing the game. They look like they're a solid team, but they also kind of look like they are still trying to like remember the things that they've practiced and like what their protocols are and what they're supposed to be doing at different times. And I think part of that is because they kind of have been trying to like reinvent what they're doing from week to week because they haven't really landed on the most comfortable and best setup for them. And that is causing them to look a little bit sloppier and be sort of less precise and less like the G2 that we have gotten used to over the last year. And when you're playing against a team like Loud that doesn't really have much to lose and has, you know, some pretty high firepower players, when you are a bit sloppy, sometimes those like small mistakes can really snowball. And I think that's kind of what we saw on a couple of these halves. You know, both of these maps were relatively close, even though I don't really feel like G2 ever was in danger of losing either of these maps. They didn't really feel clean. And I think that for Loud, what I'm seeing is that, you know, they've had a lot of problems just as far as they're still playing with their assistant coach who is IGLing them. And they have, you know, players kind of like trying to do too much. It feels like Luke Shaw is starting to almost like try too hard sometimes and really kind of overextend, especially on Haven. He was playing Vice and he was constantly like pushing up in front of his Vice setups, trying to find contact, trying to make like a big hero play. And I guess my main hope for Loud is that they don't overreact to this stage. Like, they haven't had their full team. They've been dealing with some, you know, out of server problems. And I kind of hope that they just don't like learn the wrong habits from how they have to play right now, and that they don't overreact and they just allow, you know, Erde to come in, and then they go into stage 2 knowing that they can shoot with these teams, but they just need like time as a team and to practice, and they should have that in spades as long as they don't like blow up the roster. And so it's a tough spot because I mean, I've been on a team that is dysfunctional and you know, trying to solve problems, and sometimes it's almost better. And I kind of feel like Loud should be in this spot, should understand that, you know, even though they are pro players, like, it's okay for them to be losing right now because they just don't have their full team. So if they can kind of just, like tank that for this stage, really work coming into stage two, I feel like this team has potential because they have some good players and they really do have some talent. And I feel like they've, done some good stuff, but at the same time, they just look, significantly worse as a team overall, which is understandable. On G2's side, I really do like what they're doing with the Harbor. I feel like Valen's utility this week was especially good. And I think that they have a fairly unique read on what they should be doing, which could pay dividends going, into playoffs and potentially into internationals. But I really do need to see them kind of like tighten things up. And it feels like if they can hit that sort of flow state where everybody is comfortable, they could be a really dangerous team. But I'm also a little bit worried that they won't actually get there in time and they'll just kind of get potentially run over by some of these like really aggressive teams that seem to be comfortable playing this double duelist style, like a Lev or a Crew or something like that. But we'll have to see. They still obviously are in control of their own destiny and they should make playoffs, and that gives them more time to grow. So it'll be interesting to see whether G2 can kind of like figure it out in time. Moving on to Furia and Crew. Speaking of, two of the, more comfortable teams, I think, in the Americas region. This was a very interesting match coming into the week, and I've been very high on this Crew roster since the beginning of the year. I had them top 2 or top 3 coming into the season, and then obviously they played with their reserve roster at kickoff, so that kind of changed things. But I have been extremely impressed with this team so far in stage 1. I mean, Sadak is playing some, all-time level Valorant right now. He's calling on the smokes role. He is just really orchestrating some great rounds. And then around him is just maybe this team might literally be the highest firepower team in the world currently. It's close. You've got like Paper X, and really there aren't too many other teams that can shoot with this team. Like Dante Deus, certainly one of the best neons in the world. Les looks like he is in prime Les form. He's finding a ton of really smart lurk value, and also the way that he's anchoring is super nice. MW Zera has been probably better than expected, and kind of like in a almost like quiet way where he has like these big flashy multi kills and crazy flicks and stuff like that, but it doesn't feel like he's trying to take over the game too much, which I think he was doing a lot on previous teams where he would do some very risky plays even on maybe non-duelist roles just to try and like have impact. And then Silence has been a very solid, secondary duelist / sentinel player. Their roles look very comfortable. The way that they're playing the game looks very coordinated. And the team that they beat in Furia is not a slouch team. Like Furia is a solid team and probably still in like the top 4, top 5 teams in the region. And Crew made them look pretty outclassed, especially on Lotus. I mean, this was just a destruction. But Haven was relatively close, and Furia did a very nice job adjusting to Crew. I think that they were a little bit, I mean, honestly, they were just a little bit outclassed firepower wise, and I think kind of like speed of decision making and coordination wise. But they're obviously still a very good team. And so for Furia, I mean, they should certainly make playoffs still. I think Crew is fairly locked in at the number 1 seed. I don't really see any team beating them right now. But I do think that both of these teams have very strong potential to go to Masters London and can do damage in the playoffs for sure. I think the one thing with Furia that I would want to pay attention to is just the consistency of Alum, because when he's on, and there was even some rounds in this series where he looked like he had aimbot and he was just like so clean with his shooting. But in kickoff, he was very up and down, and we've seen a little bit of flashes of that. And I think especially if they're going to put so much weight on him of being the neon, he needs to be a very consistent player. So as long as he can, continue to hit good form, I feel like Furia is still in a pretty good spot. And they just lost to a very good team, which is Crew. Okay, let's move on to the next match, which was Energy versus 100 Thieves. And the first thing that we want to talk about, just real quick, is Energy has now replaced their assistant coach. Obviously, Strong didn't come into this stage as their assistant coach, and they've just had Bonkar in the booth. And it looks like they have now hired Mitch as their assistant coach, who was the IGL for Oxygen back when Bonkar was the coach. Um, Obviously has been playing in VCT off and on and VCL for a long time as an IGL. Should be a good, I would assume, should be a good pairing with Bonkar since they've worked together extensively in the past. Gives a little bit more of a like really heavy micro player, I would assume. You know, just anybody who's been a pro at a high level tends to be pretty micro focused, and that allows Bonkar to maybe do more of the, you know, strategic and macro stuff, and then Mitch can potentially work with people individually as far as, you know, angles, how they're taking fights, you know, specific little things like that. So it'll be interesting to see whether that has a significant impact or not. The other thing that was big in this game is just the energy resilience seems to be back. I mean, 100 Thieves crushed them on Pearl, at least in the first half. And this was a very weird map, actually, because Energy continues to play their double drone, which I think is a solid comp. I think it's a comp that in the current meta is significantly weaker than it was in the Yoru meta, because what made the double drone really good in the Yoru meta is that you always had to find the Yoru and chase him off the angles to make sure that you're not giving up too much space or to make sure that you're not getting picked with the operator. But in the current meta, there isn't a ton of like angle holding. It's a lot of just, you know, taking space aggressively, running it down. And especially on the defensive side, it felt like Energy was like not ready for the tempo that 100 Thieves was playing at. They came in kind of slow. You could see what their plan was. They kind of had their two drone agents in the middle of Pearl. And if they would lose space on either of the mains, they would use both of their drones to re-clear middle without having to risk their bodies. But everything was kind of slow, and it just didn't really feel like they were matching the pace at which 100 Thieves was moving, and 100 Thieves would just kind of like take a main and then just hit the site, and then Energy was retaking, but probably they'd use their drones to re-clear space in middle or somewhere else, and so they didn't have the drones to actually help with the retake. And it was just kind of a weird, it was like a weirdly asynchronous game where the pace of play that Energy was trying to play at was not matching up with how 100 Thieves was playing, and 100 Thieves was just dictating what was happening in the game. So it looked really good for 100 Thieves to start out, and then Energy goes to Lotus and, you know, does a great job just kind of controlling the pace of play on their side. 100 Thieves is playing a double Sentinel comp, which is, you know, in theory, pretty good against the Neon and double Duelist. And I can understand the meta read. There's a lot of people talking about, like, oh, why are they playing Sage? Why are they playing Sova on this map? They should just be playing a Fade. Now, in my perspective, I actually think that Sova is pretty good on Lotus, and I think the stats bear this out as well. Obviously, Fade is like the most comfortable agent, and it pairs well with the Rays and stuff like that. But the Sova can actually be really nice, especially if you're worried about the operator. The shock darts are obviously very good at breaking Vice utility if you think there's going to be a Vice on the other team. And I mean, there's been plenty of teams that have had success with the Sova. So I don't really think the comp is the problem here. I just kind of feel like the main thing for 100 Thieves was that they didn't really utilize their Sentinels that well on defense. They kind of were just like letting Cryo be on an anchor like by himself, or they were just letting Asuna. They were getting too sort of reliant on like, well, we have Sentinel utility, it'll just stop whatever hit, and so then we can kind of let them sit on an island by themselves. But I don't really think that that is how the game works, especially when teams have been dealing with Vice on this map for so long. Is like, you need to support the Vice. The Vice is really good if you can protect the wall, and if you can stop the other team from finding out where the Vice is, and if you can kind of have multiple layers of stall. But if you just have like a Vice trying to bunker C or trying to bunker A, and you leave them on an island and hope that they can do their job, it just doesn't work out that well. I also think that Energy did a really nice job like mixing in the operator here and there, and overall their macro is just great. And I think 100 Thieves was a little bit kind of scrambled, especially in the mid round. You drop the stage wall, it gets broken, and now all of a sudden you feel like you have a gap. And it felt like they were just not really like working with their macro like gap minding and rotations that well. So Energy kind of outcalled them and outshot them in some big moments. Kiko had a fantastic series, especially moving on to Breeze. This one was just brutal. I don't want to see Bang play Harbor anymore. I think that Harbor is great on Breeze, really, really good on Breeze, and we saw it from Mata, which I think a lot of people were like, "What the hell is going on?" Kiko's on Duelist, Mata's playing Harbor. What's going on here? So one thing about Harbor is that basically all of the best Harbors that I've watched, think Forsaken, Mizzino, Mata maybe, are like duelist or aggressive players, because Harbor is a very aggressive controller. As weird as that might sound, he's best when he's playing aggressively, and being creative and like taking risks. And you could see the difference here. Bang is a very kind of like careful player, and his Harbor looked atrocious. It was horrifically bad. His utility was bad. His positioning was bad. The way that he was reacting was bad. His ults were terrible. On the other side, Mata was just like throwing stuff and being creative with it and taking duels, and the difference was super stark. Then on top of that, you just had Kiko in God mode. Like, he was just unbelievably clean. I kind of like this little mix-up that they did where they were like, all right, Kiko, you've been on the Sentinel role, you've been kind of like in the back lines, we're going to unleash you for a map. And it kind of looked like he was like let off the leash in a big way. The other thing I will say is that 100 Thieves were just not dealing with the A main pressure at all. I'm pretty sure Energy went A like almost every single round on attack, and 100 Thieves just had no answer for it. And they're obviously playing a mirror comp, so they should kind of understand what's happening. But I guess I kind of feel like they weren't utilizing their stall utility very well, and they didn't have any like creative layers of how they wanted to fight for A control. And so Energy would just like go A and then just pop, and maybe they would get knifed, but then 100 Thieves would not take enough space, or they would get like caught just walking into A main and giving away free heal. It was a weird game. It was a weird game. Anyway, it definitely made me feel worse about 100 Thieves just because they had no solution to this. And Energy looked great, and I kind of feel like at this point, Energy might be on the right track. Again, starting slow, but then being able to recover even on that first map, and then carry that momentum into the next two. It's scary when Energy feels like they can't lose no matter how far behind they are. This team is really, really dangerous, and you could see it like in their player comms during the games. Like, they were not flustered even though they were losing rounds. So very interesting series overall, with some super big implications going forward. Okay, Sentinels versus EG. I don't really want to talk too much about this game. It was a pretty bad game overall. I didn't think that either team played that well. I think that the big upsides for me are that Sentinels seems to have found like a pretty good role setup. I think that Redux is really looking comfortable, especially when he's on like the Omen, kind of like the dualisty smokes. He looks really comfortable. He's a good playmaker. And then Cortezia has looked super nice in a couple of series now. Jonah P, he obviously had like a really, really bad first map, but since then has looked very comfortable. And I feel like his experience and John Cutie's experience is going to help like the younger players kind of like find their form. That being said, they're still kind of a young team, and they look like it. They don't look super clean, but they definitely look better than EG. EG on the other side, I mean, I don't really know what to say about this team, because like I feel like they put themselves in a lot of positions to win. They get a lot of first kills thanks to Digizin, but they don't seem to be able to close rounds at all. I don't know whether it's they're over peaking at times, or their positioning is bad in post plants, or what, but it felt like they were constantly snatching defeat from the jaws of victory, and that is never a good sign for a team when they like just can't close out rounds. So the scorelines ended up being fairly one-sided, especially on Haven. But even on bind, it was 13-11, but also it kind of felt like EG could have won this like 13-8, but at the same time they were just never going to win this map. And I don't know, it's a weird situation. They're in a rough spot. Um, they just don't seem like they are like fundamentally sound enough to beat most teams that are in like the middle to upper echelon of Americas. So I don't have super high hopes for Sentinels going into playoffs. They should make playoffs, and I think that EG potentially is, you know, in another rebuild situation. I don't think that they're going to do much this year, and they will very likely be out, at the end of next week. So it's it's a it's a rough situation for them. Okay, the biggest upset, the craziest surprise: Cloud9 versus MIBR. I mean, what a weird series this was. First things first, at the end of last week, after watching Cloud9 look like maybe the worst team in the world, I was pretty adamant in saying that Penny needs to be playing Duelist. The only time this team has looked good is when Penny is playing Duelist. And Cloud9 comes into this week and they have Penny playing Duelist on both maps. Awesome. Love that. Now, as you can see, both of these matches went to overtime. 12-14 wins for Cloud9 on both of them. And I just have to say that I was super disappointed in MIBR. They looked a little bit like Vitality, in that they were kind of just like a bunch of, high skill players running around on the map doing random things. Their coordination was not good. Some players were going forward, other players were going back. Tex had a super rough game on split. And yeah, they did not look clean. They did not look like they were on the same page. And Cloud9 played pretty well. Oxy looked really good on Breeze, but Cloud9 tried to lose Breeze several times. They missed a bunch of utility towards the end. I mean, Vic was missing mollies left and right. It was a sloppy game from both teams, but Cloud9 was able to, put it together in the big moments and take advantage of the fact that MIBR was playing way too solo at times. And like, there was several rounds on Breeze in particular where Cloud9 would go A on attack, and they would see one person, maybe Mizzino, maybe Zekin, maybe Tex. They would kill the player, and then they would just run into sight. And then the one other player who was maybe playing double doors or bridge, instead of waiting for their teammates, they would just try to make a big play and just run in and try and take a 1v4 or 1v5 and just get immediately obliterated and just give away an even bigger advantage and kind of make the round unwinnable. And I feel like that was happening a lot for MIBR, where they were just kind of like feeding an extra body and allowing Cloud9 to snowball an advantage in the rounds. And then going into split, I just think that Cloud9 played a better game overall. Penny obviously looked insane. It's nice to see him playing that Duelist again. And this was, I would say, more of an issue with MIBR's coordination between their Duelists and Cloud9 having a good understanding of, how to build momentum with their two Duelists. Even though Oxy had a much lower game in terms of statistics, I feel like him and Penny were playing off of each other a lot better than Ospas and Zekin were playing off of each other. And that's a problem because, Ospas and Zekin should be like the dynamic duo, but they were not. I mean, individually they kind of were, but together they were not in this series. So overall, it's a little bit hard to tell what to take away from this series, just because, I mean, MIBR looked significantly worse than they have. Cloud9 looked like a completely different team. It's crazy that Cloud9 has a chance to make playoffs now, considering how awful they looked in the first 2 weeks. But based off of what I watched, they should make playoffs because they looked decent. But they also have some pretty tough games to close. I mean, the loud one, we'll see. Anyway, let's go into the meta real quick. I mean, What is there to say? 82% neon. I guess the one interesting thing from Americas is just the Vice being at almost 35%. Significantly less sky than some of the other regions, significantly more harbor, not very much chamber, interestingly. And then we have kind of just like a smattering of some other agents as well. We're very, very solidly in just neon everywhere. This is not a good sign when you have an agent at 100% pick rate or close to 80 or 90% pick rate on almost every single map. We do not like seeing that in this game. Every other agent at like 50 and or below. This is something that is probably just going to have to be addressed directly and heavy-handedly by Riot, as far as like getting people to switch off of this meta. But yeah, I don't know. The game is in a weird place right now. And Americas probably has the most unique stuff. If we go to some of the other regions, it's even worse. But with that being said, let's go into the pick'ems for the week. How do we do? Obviously, we missed the MIBR one, but we got everything else right. So we're doing pretty well pick'ems wise. I think 60% plus correct on our pick rate. And this week we've got EG against Energy, Lev against MIBR, Crew against 100 Thieves, Furious Sentinels, Loud Cloud9, and G2 Envy. So Evil Geniuses versus Energy. After what I've seen, Energy should pretty handedly win this. This one, Lev versus MIBR, is a very tough one. Just because of... I have to imagine MIBR is going to look better than what they showed. Lev is going to be rated really highly by everybody because of what they showed. But then I'm also a little bit worried of... They have a bunch of young players playing against Aspas and Zekin. And it's like, sometimes when you get into these games where you're playing against like the players that you maybe look up to or you just know of as being like the top guys, there can be a little bit of an imposter syndrome or like fear. And so part of me kind of wants to pick MIBR here, but that might be, it's crazy to think that a team like Aspas and Zekin is not the favorite. I think I am going to pick MIBR here, as weird as that might be. And I think I would rate Lev higher, but in this matchup, I just kind of feel like I'm a little bit worried. No. All right, let's go with the young kids. Let's go with the young kids. I feel like maybe this year is the year of the young kids rising up. Crew versus 100 Thieves. I'm going to pick Crew every game until somebody beats them. I don't think the 100 Thieves is a bad team by any stretch of the imagination, but I feel like Sadak, the way that he's calling, the way this team looks right now, is just too good. Furious Sentinels. This should be a very interesting game. Sentinels on the rise. Furia kind of falling off a little bit. But I think I'm probably going to go Furia just because I think they're more solid of a team. And Sentinels has had a couple maybe less challenging matches lately. 100 Thieves not in the best form. EG, I feel like it would be a little foolish to pick them against a team that I feel like is pretty solid in Furia. And then Loud Cloud9 is interesting. I mean, if they keep Penny on the Duelist, they should win this again. Loud playing with assistant coach. Maybe Erde is back this week, but I think that's probably just too much for Loud to overcome. And then G2 should beat Envy. Again, there's always a chance that Envy is like, I mean, Demon 1 is going to have a vendetta against G2 for not picking him up. Envy is on the verge of imploding potentially, but maybe they'll just be like, all right, whatever, who cares what people have to say, let's just swing G2. But I feel like G2 is going to be able to handle it. This one, I am so torn on this one. I kind of want to go MIBR. I feel like everybody's going to go Lev, and I think I'm going to do that. I'm going to switch my prediction. I'm going to take MIBR. I think they will bounce back. This is going to be a very, very, very fun game to watch. Okay, we spent kind of a long time on Americas. Let's quickly move on to Pacific. And Pacific had some pretty interesting stuff happen as well. You know what? Let's just start with it. Let's start with my former team. We're going to go a little out of order here. Actually, we'll get to them in a sec. RQ versus Full Sense. I was pretty confident that Full Sense was going to win this, but clearly I was wrong. RQ looked great. Jemkin is in very, very, very good form. I feel like Full Sense was a bit out of sync compared to how they have been, but this was just genuinely one of the more enjoyable games that I've watched. I feel like both IGL's Crazy Guy and Cruz called very good games, especially in the first two maps. There was a lot of nice like mid-round adjustments. Both teams kind of like feeling out what was happening in the rounds and then like poking and prodding and finding the gaps and then exploiting them. It was really nice to watch this game. And then I kind of feel like this was just one of those situations where obviously Full Sense wins Pearl, RQ wins Haven. They kind of had a couple really big crucial rounds towards the end of Haven that swung the momentum in their direction. And I think that might have broken Full Sense's mentality a little bit. Because then we come into Fracture, Full Sense wins the pistol. They get ecoed immediately afterwards, and then it was just over from there. And I really think that this was a bit of like an experience gap, as well as that is to say, because I mean, Full Sense has been a team for a while, but they are all pretty young, other than Cruz and Jit Boys. And I feel like RQ is just a very experienced, very kind of like stable team. Sometimes they're a little bit too stable and they don't have that like next level, but they were very stable in this series. And I feel like Full Sense kind of broke under the pressure. Rough game on Fracture for Full Sense. RQ looked great. I didn't have like a significantly negative connotation for Full Sense after this, but my impression of RQ went quite a bit up. So I think both of these teams will make playoffs and have, I mean, they are in playoffs. Both of them have a chance to go to London, I think, depending on, what the matchups are, who shows up when. Both of these teams are solid teams. Okay. Global Esports gets smoked, absolutely smoked by PaperX. I think what I'm seeing right now is that Global is, how do I put this? Global is not ready for the big stage, unfortunately. At least currently. This could change in the next couple of weeks, and I certainly hope it does for their playoff hopes. But this is back-to-back weeks where they have just completely folded under the expectation of, hey, if we win this game, we go to playoffs. Or also the expectation of, hey, we're playing against, PaperX, we're playing against DRX. These are the teams that always beat us, right? You can see in the head-to-head. It's just PaperX all the way down. So I think that sort of narrative is really getting to Global Esports. And I say that because I feel like this is something that I experienced last year coaching this team, is that when we would go into games against these like bigger teams that everybody knows are good or supposed to be top teams, you could just kind of feel like the extra tension was there, and it just didn't seem like we had a chance. Like we were beating ourselves mentally before the game had even started. And I feel like I was watching that happen again in this series. I mean, this just wasn't even close. It was just something just destroying them. Global making lots of mistakes. I mean, Patman tried his absolute best on Pearl, but there was just no help. They were just out-tempoed, out-called, outshot, out-traded. And so, it's looking rough for Global, but they're in playoffs now because they won their first two matches. They beat, a weak Gen G, and then they beat Secret. So they took care of business. Both those teams are in their group. They can lose out and they still make playoffs. So that will be very interesting going into next week. I'll talk about the Nongshin matchup. But yeah, I mean, I guess, good job, Global. You made playoffs for the first time ever in franchising history. It's a big moment. I would feel a little bit weird since they're kind of like limping into playoffs, but if they can beat Nongshim and take some of that momentum, I mean, they have potential to be a solid team. I'm not really sure how to think about them just because they beat two bad teams. They got absolutely wrecked by two good teams. And then we kind of have to see like where they actually stand, and I genuinely don't know. But yeah, Paper X looks good. They seem to be kind of like finding their footing, and so they are definitely I wouldn't say lock, but they're definitely a big threat to go to London and do some damage there. Okay, Gen G versus Kiwum DRX. Gen G, unfortunately, has to play with a sub, but they come out and they crush DRX in the first map. Very, very weird series to watch. Kite looked great, actually. He did a very good job on this map. He's their sub, coming in for Zinx, who has a wrist injury. But they also had to mix around their roles. I mean, Ash, who was playing super passive roles for the last year, is now playing Neon. Charon's playing Phoenix. I mean, if you just look at the scoreboard, like, what am I looking at? What is this team? But Carex, they are a very skilled team. They have some very good players. They come into Pearl, they gut it out. You know, it's the Mako show. We see Gite really struggling on the Astra. Huge Astra diff in this one. You could see that he was an inexperienced player. And I think that in this series, it was also a bit of an IGL and maybe even a prep difference. I feel like Bane has looked incredible for DRX. I feel like he's calling a very good game and he's making really impactful individual plays when he needs to. And then we go into Lotus and it's a complete war, super back and forth, and ultimately just DRX's firepower or KRX's firepower kind of wins this one out. Again, Kite, the bottom of the scoreboard, you can't fault him, right? He was Academy player like 4 days ago, and now he's trying to keep Gen G's hopes alive and making playoffs. So unfortunately, Gen G gets knocked out. It's really hard to read into this match just because of all the chaos surrounding it. And then also, anytime you have like Korean team on Korean team matchup, you kind of have to throw out a lot of the expectations, especially when you've got like Termi against Solo, who have been playing together for a long time and then coaching against each other for so long. I might have underrated KRX coming out of this matchup, but I wasn't super thrilled with how they played either. And so I think that they're still a team that I'm a little bit not sure about, because and that might sound kind of weird because they are 4-0, right? But their map differential is only plus 17, and I feel like they have not. This gonna sound bad, but they might be like the most fraudulent 4-0 team I've seen in a while. Because if we look at their actual matches, okay, they beat Secret, that's pretty normal. They beat Nongshim, who is really still trying to figure out who they are in this current patch, and it was a very close match. And then they beat Global, who completely folded under the pressure, and then they beat Gen G with a sub. So yes, they are 4-0, but are they really 4-0? You know, are they a 4-0 level team? Are they a T1? I don't think so. Are they better than Paper X? I don't think so. But, you know, standings wise, they are. So I am, I'm still a little bit not sold on them, as weird as that might be to say. Okay, let's move on to. We won't spend very much time on this. I mean, DFM locks in playoffs by beating Viral. It was pretty back and forth. I feel like Viral kind of skill gapping DFM at times, but then DFM just is, they're just a better team overall. Viral is still very like tier 2 coded, running around, taking too many chances. They've got some good shooters. They do some interesting stuff. DFM is a little bit more structured, slow, letting Viral make mistakes into them, and it kind of pays off. I don't feel great about DFM going forward in the playoffs, but they are there. Viral, they've got a ways to go before they're competitive in the league. I wonder if they will make changes or whether they'll just continue to grind. Either way, we'll see them next stage. T1 against Zeta, again, not too much to talk about here. Just kind of a flattening. Zeta did have a minor, tiny little mini comeback in both halves, but they just got plowed by T1 on attack both times. And yeah, we'll see T1 in playoffs. They look very, very good. Are they better than Paper X? I don't know. Maybe. Unfortunate for the Japanese teams. They have a ways to go. Nongshim versus Secret. And this one was significantly closer than maybe expected. Losing Fracture in a pretty one-sided way was fairly surprising, and again, I come out of this not feeling super great about Nongshim. Like, they're good, and they're good enough to beat a team that is worse than them. But also, how does that sort of impact their playoff potential? I still feel like Nongshim is trolling a bit by not having Danby play Neon. I know that they have like a reasoning for this. I know that they want Danby to be um, on the Phoenix, and they want Francis to be like the risk taker, and but I don't know. I feel like they're kind of capping themselves as far as like what their ceiling can be as long as they have Francis on the Neon. I do like that he's picking up the operator more. I think that's something that was severely missing since they got out of the Yoru meta. And I will say that I think that X Ross is potentially like a top 3 player in Pacific right now, top 5 certainly as a rookie. And I'm very excited to see how he continues to develop. I do think that Nongshim is a very good team, individually, but I feel like they don't have quite the same level of flow on how they're moving around the map and how they go from like initial phase 1 of the rounds to accelerating into a site hit or freezing and then popping. They don't seem like they're quite at the same consistency of like reading the game and moving throughout the map, moving throughout the rounds without Danby on the Neon. So I think that they've earned their way into playoffs, which is great. I was going to be really sad if they missed playoffs after winning Masters, but I don't have a ton of confidence in them making it to London because I just don't think that they're playing nearly at the same level that they were, and I think a lot of it is role based, so I don't really know how it's going to be fixed. But they are good. They are good, and they definitely could beat most of the teams in the league. On the other side of Team Secret, I want to spend just like a minute on them. I hope that this team doesn't really make any changes going into stage 2. As weird as that might be, they're sitting winless currently, right? Poor Team Secret. They haven't won a game in a long time. But I really like Zeus. I like the addition of Zeus. And the reason that I like the addition of Zeus is because I feel like this is the first time, probably the first time since they cut Jeremy, that they've had like a true opper on their team. Because Zeus loves the scope. He's picking up the scope on attack. He's picking it up on defense as often as possible. And I think that's something that they've really been missing. When they had Kelly S opping last season or whoever it was playing duelist for them, none of it was good. And the operator is so powerful and really has the potential to change like how the game is played. If you don't have somebody that's comfortable on the opper or is consistent on the op, it can really hinder how good you can be as a team. And I think that this team actually has some pretty good shooters. I think Sylvan can shoot. I think Berserks can shoot. I think Kelly S can shoot. And Zeus, being a consistent opper, is something that this team would really benefit from. And so I kind of want this team to stick together and play with this 5 now, because this is the first game they've ever played with Zeus on stage. And I could see his impact, even though he didn't have, a great day statistically. I could see his impact just by picking up the scope on a regular basis. And he seemed like a pretty high-skilled player. So there's always a pretty big chance that teams will make moves when they have a bad stage. But I hope they don't do too much, because I think that one change for this team has potential to really kind of help them move forward into like the next phase of their evolution as a team. Okay. Moving on to the meta real quick. 80%. There it is. 80%. Some big differences. Almost no Vice being played, down at 11%. We've got a lot more Sky, almost no Sova. Interestingly, the Phoenix is not being played that much, only on some matches, on some maps rather. But yeah, it's Neon. Viper being played a lot less in Pacific. This is going to be something really interesting to look at. Right now, if you look at the statistics for Viper, Viper has one of the lowest non-mirror win rates of any agent in the game. And I think the reason for that is that Viper has kind of always been this anchor for like every comp where you don't really have to play a Sentinel a lot of the time. You just play the Viper. but Viper is not good at stopping a double duelist hit. Like really not that good at stopping double duelist, especially without like Sentinel and utility to help. And so if every team is playing like double duelist, no Senti, Viper, and Viper is the anchor, Viper is getting abused a lot. And so I think we're starting to see some teams switching off the Viper and just playing like full aggro. Just run it down, explode on sight, use the Omen, the Astra, whatever, Harbor. Maybe we'll see some mix at some point if he gets buffed. But yeah, we're seeing sort of like, because teams have, you know, the Neon Wall, because they have the Phoenix Wall sometimes, there are other forms of smoke that can kind of help with the lack of smokes. We're also seeing a lot more Cypher, I think, in Pacific than some other regions. Cypher also has cages for smokes. And so those two, or those other agents can kind of make up for not having a Viper. And yeah, I think also, obviously, map preference plays a big role in this as well. But I do think that Viper is in probably the weakest spot that she's been in because of how she has been played and how that style of play interacts with the current meta. So there's something to keep an eye on. Okay, let's go to pick'ems. None of these games really matter that much. Some of them do for seeding wise, but you know, the playoffs are already decided. You can see we're doing pretty well in our pick'ems. We get like 4 out of the 6. Wait, how many games? Yeah, 4 out of the 6 games right every week, and we'll try and do the same thing here. Gen.G versus Team Secret. Honestly, I'm gonna go with Secret getting a win. They have nothing to play for. Neither does Gen.G. I'm gonna go with Secret, working on, you know, getting Zeus integrated. Varel versus Zeta. I think I'm gonna go Varel. I just have no faith in Zeta Division at this point. I feel like I could watch them like losing confidence over the last couple of weeks, and one of the main things that was allowing them to play relatively well early on is that they were making decisive moves together, and I feel like that's kind of fallen apart as they've lost games. T1 versus Full Sense. This one could be very interesting. I'm going to go with T1. I definitely think Full Sense has a chance to win this, but I think T1 will want to lock in that spot. They'll take it very seriously, and they're in very good form right now. Nongshim versus Global. Now, I think on paper, this should be a Nongshim win. Because I just think that they're probably a better team, but I don't think that they're at their like peak, and I do think that Frost understands how to play against them relatively well, and I also think that suddenly not having the pressure of qualifying for playoffs will allow Global to play well. So I'm going to pick Global, because yeah, they've really just folded under the pressure, and now there's no pressure. I think it'll maybe free them up a little bit. We'll see. This is definitely a bit of an upset because I do think that Nongshim looks significantly better than Global right now, but we'll see. We'll take a flyer on that one. PaperX versus DRX. I think that PaperX should destroy them. To be honest, I really do think that PaperX is a higher level than DRX, but also I could be significantly underrating DRX because I don't think they played great against Gen.G. Again, this is maybe for the top seed in the group. It should be, right? Because if PaperX wins, then they're 4-1. KRX would be 4-1, but they'd have the head-to-head. So this match will definitely matter. I'm going to go PaperX here. RQ versus DFM. This should be a pretty easy RQ win. I think their form is rounding into a good spot. DFM, I think, is maybe like the 3rd worst team in the league, despite making playoffs. So yeah, those are my pick'ems for Pacific. And let's move on to EMEA. EMEA. This podcast is going to be a little bit longer than usual, but we're yapping a bit. Okay. Let's go on to EMEA, and we have Eternal Fire versus Pacific. This was a absolute mud fest. Eternal Fires looked like, you know, a really like on the rise team. They've been significantly better than expected. And I feel like this was a bit of a trap game for them where Pacific doesn't have much to play for, right? They've been getting kind of owned. The only thing they really have to play for is pride at this point. And I feel like they kind of like came into this game and were just like, fuck the strategies. We're just going to try and fight them at all times. You could see it on Split. You could see it on all the maps where they were just like in Eternal Fire's face over and over and over. I think it kind of caught EF off guard. And it kind of goes into what I was saying early on in the podcast about how when you want to stop an aggressive team, like Eternal Fire, like Lev, like, these double duelist teams, you want to set the line of conflict as far forward towards the attackers as possible. And I feel like that was happening a lot in this series, and it was kind of catching Eternal Fire off guard. And so we saw some really nice stuff from Pacific early on, but then I think it kind of got to that point where they're just opting into all these fights, and Eternal Fire is just, they're just kind of slightly better players individually, and they're kind of starting to win those out. And by the end of the series, Eternal Fire's feeling pretty good. They've kind of come back from a couple of, iffy maps, and they run away with Lotus pretty early. Then Pacific kind of brings it back, but at the same time, EF was in a spot where they were feeling pretty comfortable going into the second half. So the comeback ended up being a fake one. Did I feel worse about Eternal Fire after this one? Honestly, not really. I think this was probably a pretty good test for them because it showed that they don't have weak mental. Because I think a lot of teams will get to a point where, they're going on a run and all of a sudden they lose to a team that they think is worse than them. And that can be like, oh no, like, are we fraudulent? And I feel like Eternal Fire, they handled that, right? They lost the first map. They kind of were getting crushed in the second map, and they came back, and then they gutted it out, and they rode that momentum to victory. So I think that Eternal Fire is in a pretty good spot right now. Echo continues to just be incredibly impressive to me. Like, he's super young, just joined the league, and I feel like he has insane impact in almost every single round. Overall, this team is just really fun to watch. Like, they're really fun to watch. They look like they have a good time on stage. I'm very excited to see them play in playoffs. I don't think they're going to make it to London because I think that there's some other teams that are going to be a little bit better than them structure-wise and can match their firepower. But they are very fun to watch, and I'm excited to see how they finish out this year. And, maybe they go on a run. For Pacific, I don't know. I mean, we'll see if they make changes. They certainly should not let go of Seven. I think that's pretty clear. He's been a pretty incredible player for them. I don't know what else they'll do. I assume that they will make some moves because this roster was kind of just thrown together at the beginning of the year. They've had kickoff and now stage one. They've been fairly unsuccessful. I assume they'll probably make some moves before stage two, but we'll see. Moving on to Navi versus Liquid. Navi, unfortunately, they just don't have it. They just don't have it right now. They have potential. They certainly have potential, but right now they just don't have it. They don't have like the cleanliness. They don't have the consistency. They've got some very good players on their team, but all of the roster chaos, duelist swapping in and out, bringing in comeback, reinventing their comps to fit comeback. It's been a little bit too much. Filu playing one role, playing another role, now he's playing smokes. It's too much going on. I'm sure they will figure it out going into stage two. And actually, I mean, where are they at? Are they going to make playoffs? They probably will not make playoffs. Are they fully out? No, I think there's still a chance where they could make playoffs. They probably won't though, but there's always a chance. Regardless, stage two will be when I'd be interested in seeing the team play when they have a full five that has played together for a while. On the other side of things, Team Liquid, I mean, they're just Team Liquid. Like, they're just a team that beats teams that they're supposed to beat. I don't necessarily feel like they played super well, but they played pretty well. And I think that they are, they're in their system. They're double duelist, Camo, Miniboo, Raze or Phoenix plus Neon every single map. Nats on the lurk, Wayne playing smokes, Purpo playing an aggressive initiator. It's working out pretty well for them. They definitely have a very good chance of going to London, making yet another Masters. They do have to be worried though, I think, because they're a team that is they're kind of like really embracing this brawly fight first style of play, And if they get too carried away with that against a team like Foot or Eternal Fire, or potentially Heretics, maybe revitalized, I think that could go the wrong way for them. They're definitely a solid team, uh, and I think they are kind of just again like in that gatekeeper spot, uh, where they should make it to London, but also if a team is better than them individually, they might get like surpassed. Okay, moving on to the next one, we've got Giants versus Fnatic. Giants versus Fnatic, and I mean, this was a little bit of a weird game. Fnatic had a last minute medical sub where their coach is playing, and they get smoked on Haven. Not that surprising. They come back and beat Giants fairly easily on the next two maps. Not a great look for Giants losing to an assistant coach, but also Fnatic is they're just so impressive. Like their system is just so good. And look at Boaster's stats. Like he knew he needed to step up and he did. He top fragged on one map, second on the other one. Alpha stepped up, Kayak stepped up. I mean, this team is like I really just have to hand it to their system. The coaching staff, Boaster, everything about Fnatic, the way that they organize and operate on game day. They handle these problems way more consistently well than basically any other team. Giants, I mean, they still have a chance of making playoffs, but losing to an assistant coach is not a good look. Not too much to say about that. All right, Foot versus Karmine Corps. This was also pretty interesting. This was kind of like the Eternal Fire versus Pacific game where Foot has been on a run. They've been looking good. They come out and they lose. Uh-oh. Wait, we're losing to Karmine Corps? How are we losing to Karmine Corps? Ain't no way, right? Then they come out on Lotus and they gut it out. Karmine Corps plays pretty well, but maybe a little bit too scrappy. But, Karmine Corps keeps opting into these fights. They're playing. I mean, Karmine Corps was literally just like, we're just going to go full comfort. Same comp every single map. We're putting Dacia on Omen. We're putting Sugetsu back on Cypher. We're going to put Aves on his favorite agent of Phoenix. Just run around, boys. Take fights. But by the time we got to Bind, I mean, we're playing Narrate on Gecko. That's a throwback to OG Karmine Corps, like 2 years ago. Last year? 2 years ago? Whatever it was. And Foot is just the better team. They're just better. They're more coordinated. They've got the same level or higher shooters, and they were able to just kind of, be the better team overall in the series. So Karmine Corps is done. Will they make changes? I think they need to. I think they need to make probably like at least 2 roster moves in the off season or before stage 2 if they want to have a chance at making champions. Foot, on the other hand, locks in playoffs, 4-0, top of the group probably. Really, really good turnaround for them. Gotta hand it to them. They look really nice, and we'll have to see whether they can maintain this form into playoffs because that's playoffs is a whole different ball game. Everybody starts playing a little bit more carefully, more well thought out. You get anteed a little bit harder. Teams pull out some like weird map picks, some comp changes. So it'll be interesting to see whether they can keep this consistency going forward through playoffs. But certainly have an inside track to making it to London, which would be a pretty huge move for this team. All right, Heretics versus Gentlemates. This one was pretty interesting. Heretics has been looking pretty rough. They showed some flashes of brilliance here and there, but they've been looking pretty rough overall as a team. Gentlemates has been struggling to recover from not having Yoru propping up all of their maps, and they got kind of gapped by Heretics. I mean, honestly, it really felt like they were outclassed in this one. Martine had a great Lotus, not a great Fracture playing the Veto, but overall, I think the big story here was Koshmaris looked really good on the Neon, and the rest of Heretics around the Neon running it down and just kind of like playing with freedom. I feel like the whole team was playing with freedom. All of them were a lot more like locked in and hype on stage. I feel like they're kind of like an emotional team to some extent on stage, and they looked like they were, lots of positive emotions this week, lots of good energy, lots of being excited to play the game. And I feel like Kashmiris is really kind of spearheading that by, playing a super good entry neon, mixing in the Odin slides, all sorts of crazy stuff. Um, taking some of the weight off of Woot to play the entry, and overall some good calling as well. I think that Mates is in a spot where they are still trying to figure it out. I think they're finding the right solutions in terms of like having Martine on the secondary duelist a lot, but it's not functioning as well as the Yoru. And they need like Mini to step up. They need Bippo to step up. And neither one of those players has really been consistently good this stage. Glyph and Starkso have been solid. I feel like Starkso's form has also dipped quite a bit, trying to like, maybe call around the new structure. It's not like this team is bad. They're definitely like a middle of the pack team. But I feel like as other teams have gotten better, Mates has kind of just been like static and maybe not improving quite as quickly as some of the other teams around them. Okay, let us go to our final match of EMEA, and we've got BBL versus Vitality. Vitality wins map number 1, loses map number 2, gets absolutely crushed on map number 3. This is definitely alarm bells for Vitality. I think so. I've been very down on BBL this year. Even when they went to Masters, I was like, I don't think this team is that good. I think after watching this, I feel like they might be starting to turn things around. We see that Lovers Rock is playing the Jet on multiple maps, and I think that's kind of what they need to be doing, is leaning into that. He's a very good opper, very good scope user, and we saw that with his Yoru play. And even in tier 2, he was just always like a Jet and Yoru player, and that's it. Didn't really play anything else. So they are, putting him on the stuff that's comfortable, and it's kind of unlocking their play style a bit, because I think that scope really changes things. I think one thing that is really maybe missing from the analysis of this double duelist meta is that if everybody is running it down all the time, there are a lot of opportunities to get picks with the op. And there's a lot of opportunities to mix up the tempo and attack by having an op contact, because most teams are playing far back because they don't want to get exploded on by double duelist. And so it gives the op a lot of space to be able to kind of like clear angles systematically, find picks. And then also on the defense, if you're playing an agent like a Jet who can instantly escape, or a Chamber, you have a lot of opportunities to be like, well, they're 5-0 hitting us, so I can just peek out, get a pick, teleport out, and it's a really easy way to start the game. So I think the op is like maybe the most important weapon in the game right now, and having a player that is good with the op, that you enable to be good with the op, is really important to success. So BBL kind of figuring it out. Vitality. I referenced them when I was talking about MIBR. I feel like they are playing as if they think they are better than all of these other teams, and so they don't have to play the game well, like as a team. And they're just taking like random fights and doing random stuff individually, and it's not coordinated, and they don't look like they are on the same page or communicating very well. And we actually had a few listens in, and obviously, the listen-ins during the match are like tiny little snippets. We have no other context of how the rest of the comms are, but there were definitely some kind of like concerning things in the listen-ins that we had, where 4 people are talking at once. People are asking questions about what should be done instead of like commanding their teammates to do stuff, and just a lot of kind of almost like a ranked environment type of feeling. And so one worry I do have for this team, I don't want to like call them all like egoist players, but sometimes when you're so good at the game, you don't really get good practice a lot of the time, because you just kill the other team. So like if you're not really careful with your scrim partners, sometimes you're just winning in ways that are bad constantly, and you don't get good feedback. And so you just learn bad habits because you just skill teams. And so I wonder if some of that is coming through now, where they've just been shitting on teams in practice. So then they go into the games and they make the same plays that they would make in practice, but because teams in officials play more carefully and more well thought out, and they have antes and they have all this other stuff, that the scrim style does not translate well. And so I kind of have to wonder whether that is playing a role here. I genuinely have no idea, but we're seeing some like pretty bad form from Vitality as far as like being a team. Sure, they have like crazy moments of individual talent. Durka will have a crazy 4K with the operator. Sayonara will hit a 4K, whatever. But it's not consistent enough because the structure around these individually talented players is not holding them together when they don't do things perfectly, or when the other team doesn't give them the opportunity to get that advantage. So, yeah, I mean, Vitality, where are they at now? They're on the outside looking in. I think there is a chance that they can make playoffs, but they need some help. They definitely need some help. So, kind of an interesting one. Okay, let's go ahead and look at the meta. 84% EMEA went from being the most cerebral region to being the most brain dead region. They are playing 84% Neon, running it down. They do not care. They are also playing a decent amount of Chamber. I think there's a lot of Turkish teams that are playing the Cypher. Not very much Chamber, which is kind of interesting. And then, yeah, just lots of the same comp. Neon, Viper, plus a Smoke, plus a Fade, sometimes a Sky. Secondary Duelist, actually not as high as you would think. Lots of, I guess it really is a lot of solo Neon being played, which is kind of interesting. I might have to do some math on this and see like how much solo Neon versus how much double Duelist is being played in EMEA, and then contrast which is having more success. My guess is that double Duelist is having more success. So that'll be interesting to look at. Okay, let's do our pick'ems. How are we doing on pick'ems? We're doing okay. We're about similar to all the other regions, 3 or 4 right every single week. Heretics versus Foot. This is going to be a very interesting match. Right off the bat, we got a tough one. I'm going to come back to this one. We're going to go Vitality over Pacific. Unfortunately, I just don't think Pacific has the skill to beat Vitality, even if Vitality's not playing well. But man, that is tempting. That is definitely a tempting upset pick. Karmine Corps versus Na'Vi. I mean, who knows? Who knows? I'll go Na'Vi. Na'Vi needs to win. Karmine Corps doesn't care. We'll go Na'Vi. BBL versus Fnatic. I think I'm going to go... Ooh, this is interesting. Part of me wants to go BBL because Fnatic has kind of struggled against the teams that run at them, like Eternal Fire, for example. But is BBL good enough at this point? I think that Fnatic will just kind of feel a little bit invincible. They want the top seed. I think they'll lock it down. I think this one could be kind of close. BBL might come out and beat Fnatic on the first map, and then Fnatic has to claw their way back in. Especially if BBL continues to lean into Lover's Rock on the Jet. I think that could be good for them. But I think Fnatic will win. Eternal Fire Giants. I think I'm just going to go EF. I could definitely see Giants winning this, but I think Eternal Fire... Again, they kind of had like their trial by fire last week where they could have lost a game that they should be winning, and they were able to scrap it back, so I think they'll win this one as well. And Gentlemates versus Liquid. I'm going to go Liquid. I feel like Gentlemates just isn't quite in the form that they need to be to make it. So we'll go Liquid here. Heretics versus Foot. Ooh, man. I think I'm going to go Heretics here. I liked what I saw out of them this week. I really did. And I do think that Foot is good, and I do think that Foot is still one of the top teams in the region, but Heretics has that experience. Foot is a fairly, young team overall. They haven't really been tested that hard so far. I I think Heretics is going to bring something that Foot has not experienced yet this stage. And so I'm going to pick Heretics here. Okay. Not much to talk about for China. We're just going to do the pick'ems. We're going to remind ourselves about the meta. It's ugly. It's ugly. It's going to change, though, because this entire stage was played with the pre-nerf Waylay. So I assume the meta will look quite different. Maybe not super different, but it will definitely look somewhat different going into playoffs. Let's go ahead and do our pick'em. And to do this, I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to do the pick'em, but I've been building an app. Been building an app to do predictions for fun. And so I'm going to bring up that app and do predictions as well with the app. And this is going to be an accumulation of stage 1 and kickoff data. I'm not going to include the international because Chinese teams fold to internationals. So it's going to be stage 1 and kickoff data, with stage 1 being weighted a lot more than kickoff data. That's what this bar does. So the kickoff data will be half of the weight. And we'll just go through and we'll predict all of them. I'm going to do the picks normally, and then we'll predict all of them as well. So XLG versus TEC. This one is pretty interesting, actually. TEC has played some pretty close maps against some decent teams. I do think the XLG is just a better team, and so they should probably win this. But there's always a chance that Noman is in kind of like feeding form, and Titan Esports has been pretty solid in terms of their structure. And I think they have some very good players, actually. So I'm going to go XLG. But yeah, it'll be interesting. Let's just see. Let's see if the app agrees. We've got XLG and we've got TEC. Not TED, TEC. 2% chance for TEC to win. XLG 97%. All right. The app agrees. 81% chance it's going to be a 2-0. This is predicting. Wait, hold up. Abyss and Corrode, get those out of here. Hold on. Does this change the math? Lotus? Fracture? Oh, TEC gets another 4%. Split Breeze Bind, the most likely pick bans, according to this, based off of what they have picked and banned or played so far. But XLG is going to win. Yeah, okay. JDG versus Tyloo. Now, this one is going to be very interesting because JDG has had sort of a big reinvention of their system where they have put Jay as their main duelist and Stu as their smokes player. And it has really changed how well they've been playing. Also, Tyloo has been just a pure double duelist team with a lot of Waylay Neon. So will they fall off a bit without that Waylay? Now, JDG has also been playing a lot of Waylay Neon. And Yuka has been their, like, send it in on Waylay, recall back, allow Jay to go in and fight. I think I'm going to go Tyloo here because I think Splash and Jay are actually very, very close in terms of their skill. If we look at stats and we filter by Neon, I think we can do this here. Yeah, Jay is actually the highest rated Neon in China right now. Splash number 2. Or Splash number 3, really, really close. It's going to be a very interesting game. With the Waylay, we've got heavy Yuka sending it in, baiting for Jay basically, and then for Tyloo we have ERV going in, taking space. Yeah, I'm really curious to see how these teams adapt to not having the buffed Waylay. Ooh, this is actually gonna be a really interesting series. I think I'm gonna go Tyloo, but I would not be surprised if JDG wins this. Okay, All Gamers versus Trace. And actually, you know what? Because we're having trouble deciding, let's do it the proper way. Got Tyloo. We've got JDG. Tyloo victory. Okay. Go Tyloo victory. All Gamers versus Trace. Trace has been pretty disappointing to me. All Gamers has also been a little bit rough, and they've been really heavily reliant on fan gear on the Waylay also. So will he continue to play Waylay? And if not, I mean, maybe they just put him on the Jet. I'm going to go All Gamers, but they have not been the same team that they were in stage or in kickoff. They've definitely been significantly weaker. We'll just, I'm going to assume that the app is going to agree. We got Trace against AG. Pretty heavy AG. Okay. Edward Gaming versus DRG. EDG looks like they're in pretty good form. DRG looks pretty rough. I think this is pretty straightforward. I'm not even going to do the app one because I just know it's going to put EDG through. All right, lower round one. TEC against JDG. Oh, man. I'm going to need the app for this one because the thing is, I feel like JDG is probably the better team, but if they lose, do they mentally crumble? And TEC is like a sneaky good team. Yeah, see, this one's close. This one's close according to our calculations. I think I tend to agree with this. I'm going to put JG through, but again, I would not be surprised if TEC wins this. Would not be surprised at all. And then Trace DRG, I'm going to again lean on the app because I don't really have an opinion. I think DRG probably wins this. Yeah, I think they're just, you know, they can kind of just outshoot Trace. I don't think that Trace is great. XLG versus Tyloo. This is going to be a banger. XLG won the last time they played, I'm pretty sure. But it's going to be close. Let's go to our app. Tyloo versus XLG. XLG pretty heavily favored. I think I tend to agree with that. I think that especially with Waylay going out, XLG has not been leaning on. I mean, they've been using No Man as like their Waylay drone basically a lot, but I think it might even be better for them if they don't play a lot of Waylay because I think that No Man tends to just like feed his life away when he's playing Waylay a lot. So XLG is going to take that one. EDG versus AG. I think EDG should win this pretty easily. We'll just verify mathematically. EDG versus AG. Yep, pretty straightforward. AG versus JDG. If JDG wins this, I think they will win this as well. And again, just kind of double check. JDG versus AG. See, AG. Okay, what if we take out the kickoff data? I assume this is going to be a lot closer. Yeah. But maybe we should be doing this without the kickoff data because AG's team is different now. Obviously, switching models in the middle of a prediction is probably not very statistically rigorous. But, yeah. JDG's kickoff was rough. They're a completely different team now. AG also has a different player. They're playing a lot differently now. Maybe we should just redo this with you know what? Screw the app. We're just going to do it on vibes for the rest of this. Tyloo should beat DRG. Tyloo rematch against JDG. I want Tyloo at the Masters, so I'm going to pick them to go through. XLG versus EDG. I think XLG wins. I think... Dude, I don't know what these teams are going to be playing since they've been playing Waylay for an entire patch. I don't know. Let's go Tyloo. And we'll have XLG winning it. Very, very boring pick'ems for China. But if we get Tyloo at the Masters, that's all I really care about. Okay, that's the end of the pick'ems. That's the end of the episode. Thank you guys for watching. I appreciate it. Hope this was enjoyable. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and we will see you next week.